Welcome to a new episode of Foreign Correspondents Deeper into Hitchcock podcast. My name is Michał Oleszczyk and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host
Sebastian Smoliński. Hello.
This is the 16th episode of a podcast in which we discuss every single film in Alfred Hitchcock's filmography. We go film by film, and every time we are trying to plunge deeper into context and to bring some more knowledge and scholarship to films that we love, made by the director that we admire. Please follow us on Facebook if you like this episode and if you liked previous episodes of the podcast. Today we continue our quest through Hitchcock's filmography with a film that is quite famous, a film that actually for many is the first full Hitchcock masterpiece, a flawless film in a way, a film called A Man Who Knew Too Much, made in 1934, and a film that was made immediately after the film that we discussed previously, which is Waltzes from Vienna, a film that we actually quite liked despite its very, very poor reputation. The Man Who Knew Too Much was generally seen as something of a Hitchcock's comeback, and today we will discuss it. It's a thriller that sets up basically a template for many Hitchcock thrillers to follow, including 39 Steps, which we will discuss next time. Many of the traits, many of the structural devices, and even, I would say, tonal idiosyncrasies that we'll find later on in Hitchcock's films are pretty much defined in this movie. In the previous films, we saw bits and pieces of an emerging sensibility. In this film, we truly witness a genuinely coherent whole, a film that at 74 minutes long presents a form of perfection, I would say, of genre perfection, and a film also that includes many new elements in Hitchcock, including the first true, fully fleshed villain, whom we will discuss in a second. Maybe we'll start by discussing the context of the film's making, the origins. How did The Man Who Knew Too Much come about, and what did it mean really for Hitchcock to make this film after the much maligned Waltzes from Vienna?
Yes, it was a huge change, not only for Hitchcock as a filmmaker, but also, I would say, for Europeans at large. Let's try to set this movie within this historical framework. Not only Hitchcock changes the studio, now he's employed at Gammon British, and Michael Balcon is his supervisor now again, and it's quite an important personality when it comes to Hitchcock's production history, let's say, when we trace his relationships with producers. So that's a huge change. What does it mean actually practically for Hitchcock? For example, he needs to gather a new crew. Not many of his previous co-workers left British International Pictures and came with him. So he needs to have a new cinematographer, new art designer, and so on and so on. So what also happens in that year, 1933, when he starts making The Man Who Knew Too Much, of course, huge changes in Europe. Adolf Hitler gains power in Germany. Reichstag burns not long time after that, and many scholars point to this context as very important when it comes to Hitchcock's so-called thriller sextet, so 6 movies that he'll make one after another that are thrillers, and that most of them have some political dimension and involve spies or some conspiracies. So that's this very relevant historical background that maybe kind of disappears in many of his American movies. But the second half of 1930s, it's the time when Hitchcock is really maybe not a political filmmaker, but certainly a filmmaker very conscious of his of the current social and political situation. That for sure. Of course, along with Hitler's rise to power, we have terrible incidents in history, like, for example, expulsion of many filmmakers from Germany, or the fact that many filmmakers fled Germany, just trying to rescue themselves, and they left the Nazi regime. And some of them will start working at Gammon British as, for example, the cinematographer for this movie, Kurt Couron, and art designer as well. So we see that once again these German ties come together in this movie. Hitchcock's interest in German cinema now can really flourish because he has German coworkers, for example, and of course new script writer that he adapted his play before, Blackmail. I'm talking about Charles Bennett. That's also an important person. I'm sure you can tell about him as well.
Yes, and it's the political context of this film is important because it's mentioned actually in the film, the beginning of the First World War. Sarajevo is mentioned and Prince Ferdinand is mentioned, but it's useful to remember, and it's also mentioned in the book Hitchcock and Censorship, that at this particular time in 1934, it was forbidden to criticize Germany in British films. So Great Britain had good diplomatic relationships with Nazi Germany, so it was absolutely forbidden to have any content in British film that would be critical in any way of Germans or of Germany as a state. So even if Hitchcock had those feelings or some premonitions, and definitely could see, for example, his star here, Peter Lorre, that he actually fled Germany and stuff. It was absolutely impermissible under the British censorship to criticize Nazi Germany. So this, as often in history, this censorship limitation becomes actually a very, very inspiring circumstance because Hitchcock cannot, he won't make a openly political film until, I guess, Lifeboat or those shorts that he will make during the war. But because he cannot really make a political film, he cannot criticize, for example, Nazi Germany, he creates a universal political thriller, which is so inconcrete because we don't really know what's this political assassination plot is about. We just know that somebody is to be killed by someone's government and somebody's spies. So we can project all kinds of political entities, anarchists or communists or Nazis. It's really up to us what we'll project onto this. What Hitchcock is creating is a sort of a universal thriller that can be applied to absolutely every situation, which is also why this movie aged so well. Some of the openly anti-Nazi thrillers made in the UK, after it was clear that the war broke out, like Michael Powell's Contraband, for example, dated much worse because they are very, very specific about the Nazis, and here it's wonderful that the political forces at play are completely abstract. We don't know who these guys are. They don't have any creed. They don't have any set of. Basically, they are the agents of chaos. They are the agents of destruction, of chaos, of evil. And that's pretty much it. But just to briefly introduce, in case somebody didn't see the film, of course we are approaching a film that has a very, very special place in Hitchcock's filmography because it's the only film that Hitchcock will remake. Right? He will do an auto remake in 1956, and we will definitely be comparing those two. So it has a special status as the only film that Hitchcock will come back to in a way. But just briefly to summarize, the story, the plot is that quite middle class British family is on vacation in Switzerland, and their daughter is kidnapped after the wife witnesses a political assassination, and then the parents are on the mission to get back their daughter, but they are also implied in a political assassination that takes place in a big set piece in Royal Albert Hall. We will discuss this sequence definitely later. But what is really striking about this film is its short running time compared to lots and lots of things that are happening. It's a very dense film in terms of events, let's say, and yes, my first question would be: we won't be comparing the two versions today because we will wait until we see the 1956 one. But what would you say was the major pleasure for you when you were watching this film? Was it this frantic pacing? By the way, it's still frantic even today, and I can only imagine, what the viewer of 1934 must have felt when, the events follow so quickly. So, what was your response to The Man Who Knew Too Much?
The frantic pacing certainly is very impressive, but I would say that something that Philip Kemp, who made the commentary for the Criterion Collection edition of the movie, mentions is this incongruity as being, let's say the essence of the movie and the something that this movie starts with and ends with. Like this, we have so many different disparate strange elements coming together, different subplots, maybe not subplots but like elements, like for example, let's have a scene at the dentist's office. Why not? It's so bizarre, we are all afraid of dentists. And then let's switch to Royal Albert Hall, and things like this that make this movie really enjoyable and really unique. I would love to dig deeper into 1933 and 4, as watch for example 100 movies from this era, which is of course impossible given the pace of our 21st century. But just trying once again, as we did with Waltzes from Vienna, to compare this movie with other movies, that then you get the impression that it was really something new, that not everybody could actually maybe not comprehend but tune into, I would say. For example, I'm thinking about one of the few negative reviews of the movie that Otis Ferguson wrote.
An American critic.
It's an American critic, because this movie had a pretty wide release in US, but as I discovered, after 5 minutes were cut by censors from this movie. So I guess given the pace of this movie, which is 76 minutes, in its uncut version, then we have 71-minute US version, let's imagine, which is even less, has even faster pace and maybe even harder to understand, to get. So I guess this is the version that Otis Ferguson watched, and he didn't like it. He thought it was showy, it didn't make sense. That's a pretty common criticism of Hitchcock generally, even when we think about his last movie actually. But then you read the critic who's describing well-known director, but who is not yet a master, right? So there is this criticism of Hitchcock as this maker of this strange, stupid movies, let's say. And I must say I like The Man Who Knew Too Much a lot, but I think it's the epitome of Hitchcock as this brilliant director of, let's say, surfaces. I'm not saying that there is no depth to the movie, but what we are really thrilled by is this orchestration of different effects, elements, scenes, which come together in this quite a unique form, which is very fresh because it wasn't reused by Hitchcock yet. But I think that the surface of this movie is so fascinating, meaning like all these, the way the actors talk, the way some scenes are shot, this funny effects. Like, for example, one of my favorite is the one I think is much copied is which is the scene of the first assassination, right? When we gradually become aware that the Frenchman was shot, only gradually, in a similar way that the main actress, the main character realizes that the man she's dancing with was shot. And it takes some time, some seconds pass, and Hitchcock is building this, as Guillermo del Toro would say, anticlimactic moment. So I would say that this movie is very enjoyable because it's like a Lego set, in a way. I'm not sure if you agree.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, you can feel the joy of Hitchcock as he's putting together the pieces of this Lego set, and I agree that definitely he pays a lot of attention to every scene, every set piece. The scene in which the character of Louis Bernard, played by Pierre Freinet, whom we actually can know from many French films of this period, when he's killed, it's an incredible moment, and it's very, very spooky because basically there's this dot on his shirt, and we realized that he was shot and that there was a single shot fired through the window, and it didn't even smash the window. It just punctured a hole in the window, and then it punctured a hole in the human body, and and he says, "Oh, I'm sorry." Like he's surprised, that it's the most elegant death ever. It's just, "Oh, I received a bullet. I'm just dying right now." But what's really striking about it, it may be even a directorial mistake, but it's actually, creates this moment of, I would say, romantic beauty. Is that the character Jill, she doesn't react, in a natural way to this. She knows that the man is dying in a full room of people, and she's not screaming. She's not, saying like, "Help me! There's something wrong with this man. We need to help him." That would be the obvious reaction, that if somebody is dying in your arms in a room full of people, you say, "Let's help this guy. Let's call the ambulance." Here, it's not that. She's like, this mother death almost, like, she just takes him in his arms, in her arms, and she gently cradles him into another world. It's an incredible scene. It may be, just, simple choice on Hitchcock's part, but it creates this incredible moment. And there are many moments in this film which I guess are almost mistakes. Like, actually, I don't remember who points this out in one of the Hitchcock's books, that, why does Jill carry this knitting work with her to the ballroom? Like, who does that? Who does take their knitting into the ballroom? But then the wool in the knitting piece actually becomes a comical point of the scene. Dan Callahan, who just wrote a wonderful book which I only know in fragments, but it was given to me by critic Odie Henderson, and I'm very, very grateful for that. The book is called "The Camera Lies: Acting for Hitchcock," and I'm, reading pieces of it. It's a great new book, so we recommend it. He actually points out that the knitting comes from a previous version of the script in which there were two older ladies who were knitting, and Hitchcock just removed the older ladies and he left the knitting. So this I think agrees with what you said about the surfaces. He doesn't really care about whether this situation is very plausible, or whether it's very plausible that the main character stumbles upon a gathering of this strange cult which involves almost, only women, by the way, in a chapel, in London. He just creates those set pieces, and it's very, very lovely. And I would agree. And basically, the question would be, which set piece is your favorite? Which is, I guess, we can comment on the scene in Royal Albert Hall, because that's the biggest set piece of the film.
Yes, that's a fantastic set piece that Hitchcock will more or less repeat, of course, in the new version, which I consciously didn't want to refresh. As you mentioned, we'll have time to discuss the American version. But yes, Royal Albert Hall sequence is great. It's famous, but if you saw Waltzes from Vienna, as we did recently, you realize that it comes almost straight from that movie sequence of the performance of the Blue Danube, right? So it's of course in that movie it's all about, let's say, performing new art. Here it's about murder, but still it's striking how how assured Hitchcock was in that particular scene. So if on the one hand we have this feeling that, for example, we have this scene with this knitting, right, with this thread that is out of blue, it comes out of blue, so it's more or less maybe a mistake, and there are several mistakes like that many people pointed out. For example, the dog, which is in the opening scene, then suddenly disappears. There's no dog anymore, right? So on the one hand we have this, but on the other we have this famous sequence in which you feel that Hitchcock knew exactly what he wanted to do, and we still, as viewers, we just follow his road. Let's say we allow him to really point our attention to one detail or another, and all of it is filtered through the heroine's eyes, through her imagination. You mentioned the scene with the character of Louis Bernard, who is and he's carrying him to the other side, let's say. And that's a great observation, because you see in that character, this double side, right? She's a sharpshooter on the one hand, and then she has these moments of stasis, let's say, of not knowing what's going on, which come, as some people mention, I think Charles Barr, they may come from black male's idea of femininity as this walking like in a trance, right? And that's what she's doing in this Royal Albert Hall scene, which of course is famous also because Hitchcock didn't have a lot of money to make this movie. He used special effects, which work great, I would say. I still have problems noticing which part of the set is painted or reflected as if the Shuftan process, and which part was really shot. So yeah, and something I discovered, researching this movie, I didn't know that, is that this musical piece was written especially for the movie. I was for many years I was convinced that they just take some, maybe more or less famous British musical piece, but no, they wrote it especially for this movie. And you cannot really enjoy the all of it in this version. In the newer version, we'll have a few more minutes of music, so at least this composition will be, let's say, more
present.
More present, yes.
Yeah, I was surprised by that as well. For years, I thought that was like a classical piece of music. I for years I thought that was by Benjamin Britten, actually, for no reason at all. But yeah, it's a piece by this Australian composer Arthur Benjamin, who wrote this for the film Storm Clouds Cantata, it's called. And thanks to the meticulousness of Criterion Collection, actually I switched on the subtitles during the film, and I, for the first time in years, and I know mostly the new version I've known for years, but first time in years I actually saw what the lyrics are, and the lyrics are completely designed to comment on the situation in the film. It's about a child, it's about the danger.
Save the child.
Save the child. So I never knew that was this literal and this on the nose. I guess probably many English speakers didn't know it either, because it's difficult to make out the words as they are sung. But yeah, it was surprising for me also to discover that this was written for the film. We can discuss briefly, or not so briefly, the central theme of the film, which we often try at least a little bit, not as strongly as Donald Spoto perhaps, but connect films to stages of Hitchcock's life. He has a daughter at this point, and the film is about an abduction of the daughter. It's about the test of a family, basically, whether a family is strong enough to sustain an encounter with evil. Evil here is really evil, and that's Peter Lorre, who basically speaks about killing children with smile on his face, and whoever saw Peter Lorre's smile, it's no joke. So it's a film about a family under siege, and actually both versions are about that. And I never registered this before, but this time when I watched this, and then I was really surprised to read the same observation in wonderful Dan Callahan's book. We actually noticed the same thing, which is this first scene of the banter between the family after when the shooting, and how much verbal violence is there in the family, which is completely served as a joke, that oh, I don't really want this child, it's your child, let's get rid of her. And then the wife who says, oh, I'm going off with another man, look what I got myself into with this marriage. It's all jokes, but actually the jokes, in a very English way perhaps, contain real tensions, and taken literally, it's basically the family which is turned upon itself, a family which is brimming with acts of verbal violence. For Hitchcock, of course, the verbal violence was his everyday mode of being. He was extremely aggressive in a very, very cold and detached way. He would say the most horrible things. Some of them are actually on record, and here you can tell that this is his sort of humor, where people are basically constantly disparaging towards one another, but it's served as this sort of like fresh dish. And you actually Dan Callahan compares it to Noel Coward's dramaturgy, in which also people are constantly engaging in this very overt irony, which is gone from the American version, by the way. And this is Callahan also quotes from this wonderful book by Robin Wood, the Hitchcock movies and then Hitchcock films revisited, that for Robin Wood, this exactly that was the proof that the family is working, that they are actually so strong as a unit that they can afford themselves those jokes, that this is such a strong family unit that they actually, can allow themselves this irony. And in the remake, supposedly, we will get to that, the family is much weaker, and this is why they don't engage in irony. They are, very emotional. They speak directly what they feel, especially the Doris Day character. Here we have this paragon of English reserve, that basically, my feelings at the moment are not important. The important thing is the family, to keep it together. So, and this observation is also in Dan Callahan's book. But for me, I was trying to see it through the eyes of the little girl, and there's this perfect, wonderful image of her being abducted, which is probably one of the most beautiful images in all of Hitchcock. It's like from a fairy tale, like this
Grimm Brothers,
Snow White or something like Grimm Brothers. It's an incredible image, also straight from, as Guillermo del Toro points out, from silent cinema. But I was thinking about it, and my issue is like, does this family change as this film progresses? We don't know even the profession of the father. We have no idea what he's doing. They start in this Saint Moritz, which was actually a Hitchcock location. He was going there with his family, and the question is there a change? Is this unit actually stronger by the end, like the unit in Rich and Strange, where they began with crisis and then they reinforced their bonds? I don't know what is your feeling. My feeling, for some reason, is that they are actually weaker by the end. That it's not as much of a working family by the end. But I don't really know why. So this is just my thought.
Yeah, I think it's one of the reasons why it's such a thrill to discuss it is that, as we mentioned, in such a movie when we are mostly offered surfaces besides the opening, let's say 6-7 minutes, which are really dramatically dense, and you described it beautifully. This banter is really strange when you hear it nowadays. For example, compared, the one movie I was constantly reminded of was The Thin Man from the same year, which on the other hand also shows you this playful relationship between husband and wife.
Between two alcoholics, by the way.
Yes, between two alcoholics, but it's of course downplayed and it's part of the fun, right? I mean, in that movie, William Powell's character uses alcohol as just another prop, as I think Roger Ebert mentions. Coming back to this comparison, there is this question of how to behave, how husband and wife can behave. I would say that the more playful behavior is also part of the 1930s culture, more general. So that's why I think this comparison with the later version may also be framed as, comparison of the ideal of a family. Like, let's say we have this 1930s family, which needs to survive the Depression and very difficult political situation in general, but we also have the decade of comedy and of emancipation, stuff like that. And then in the 1950s, maybe they become more conservative in the way they respond to each other because we have 1950s. I wonder if that's one of the reasons why we can explain it. But certainly, it's no mistake that it's a young girl, not a boy, as in the very, very early draft of the story, which was actually some kind of a case. It was a case of a plagiarism, or at least very heavily inspired by Baldock Drummond's stories, right? But they couldn't use the real source, right? So that's why it's changed a bit, and we just start with this. So the question if this family really becomes stronger, I wouldn't say. I have no idea, because there is no a single conversation at the end that would give us some hint, right? We have some images. For example, we have this triangular image, right? There is a girl descending, there is a mother on the right, the father on the left. So we have this triangle, which is a very beautiful geometric figure. But what we can say about it? I mean, does it represent some kind of unity that is now in the family? Or does it not, right? I mean, somebody mentioned, I think maybe it was even Charles Barr, that the girl will... No, I think it wasn't him. That the girl will need to, be going through psychotherapy until the end of his life, right? We don't think about it watching this movie, but I think it was a time when Hitchcock was experimenting also with the way he can depict children. He can show children as victims, right? It will be very important topic in Sabotage, when, of course, there's this famous scene with a bomb and a boy in a bus, and of course the ethical question, if was Hitchcock allowed to show this kind of torture on the viewer's part of this character, that we know this young boy will die, right? So I think here something similar happens. I mean, he's using this very powerful starting point, the abduction of a child, to, I think, get some emotions from us, but also testing the limits of how far he can go with showing this young girl's experience, Nova Pilbeam's experience. So I would say, but I think he loses that theme right in the middle. I mean, we're not really concerned with the psychological well-being of the daughter. However, there is a beautiful scene when father and daughter are finally reunited, and they have this tender moment with each other. So I think it's emphasized by the slow pull of the camera on them. So I would say there is something to it, but I think it's not really explored in this movie.
Yeah, I think I would agree, and Hitchcock doesn't show his sadistic streak yet. I think that he doesn't show, for example, the plight of the victim, and we don't really know what happens to this girl. She we see her on the phone and she talks to her mother, but the focus is much more on the mother. It's also interesting that he chose, as you said, Nova Pilbeam, who is very thin, very tall, very sportive in the film. Practically, she's the exact opposite of Hitchcock as a child. Like, she's a girl, she's thin, she's tall, and she's very physically agile. And yet she is called a fatso or a fathead by her father, right? Which we discussed food in Hitchcock and obesity. This is a running theme. So it's interesting that even this thin child is being called a fathead by her father, and it's just basically this question of what does she really go through. Is there any sort of abuse when they kidnap her? We don't really know who kidnaps her, really. Mm-hmm. I mean, we don't know. As you said, I agree with this observation about surfaces, because we cannot analyze this film as we analyze Shakespeare's play. We don't have enough hints at the character's inner life, even though Shakespeare is quoted actually in this film by Peter Lorre, when he discusses the death of children, which is he actually is looking forward to killing children, which is a shocking thing. Yeah, and I think we should slowly, going to the end, mention Peter Lorre, who was in M, of course, 1931, Fritz Lang, very notorious film about a killer of children. Farah Smith Neame, who wrote the booklet for Criterion, has this nice little observation. She says that in M he played adult killer of children, and here he plays a child who kills adults. Basically, that he's played as a child. He's constantly smiling. He's this. I would say this entrance of him in this film in an English language is really historic, because it's a new kind of villain on the screen. In M, which of course is an iconic performance and a fantastic film, and he's such a strange actor on so many levels. In M he was constantly in fear of being discovered, and he was this tormented soul. Mm-hmm. Here he's just pure evil. He's so happy with himself. He's enjoying being rotten to the core. He's enjoying not having a conscience. That's basically, we've spoken about the agents of chaos in the film, and of course we can ask whether maybe some country or some kingdom had a genuine interest in fighting with Great Britain, who was a colonial power, for God's sake, right? But even not going into that, he's a pure agent of chaos. Like, there's no political cause. It's just to cause destruction. And this actually, since he quotes Shakespeare, brought me to thinking of him as, this Shakespearean agent of chaos, like Iago in Othello, like Don John, of course, in Much Ado About Nothing. He simply enjoys seeing the world burn. And he smiles his very strange smile as he does it, and he's a little bit of a baby, a little bit of an adult. What an incredible actor. I mean, I cannot like even find anyone nowadays who would be this odd and yet great. What was your feeling about Peter Lorre's performance?
What you said is brilliant and very interesting. I mean, I was really inspired by what you just said. And I totally agree. I'm fascinated by Lorre, not from today, of course. And all you said points us to the other figure that is very relevant nowadays, maybe even overpraised, so the figure of Joker, right? Maybe this is another link. You actually said it, right? I mean, there is this famous quote from The Dark Knight and Heath Ledger's Joker that, I think it's Michael Caine saying that some people just like to see the world burn, right? And so another, this kind of Shakespearean dimension. And I think what you said is really kind of moves us to the center of the conversation. There is some he's very sinister, but also the way he's enjoying what he's doing, but also the way he's always kind of out of place. That's kind of my interpretation. He's not a suave villain, right? He's looking very strange. His physical features are like this strange blonde.
He always looks sweaty.
Yes, he looks sweaty. He's made uglier than he really is, right? In this movie, I mean, he could be really charming as an actor, and actually, I would say he is charming in some of the later Hollywood movies. 1 year later, he played in Mad Love, which is one of my favorite obscure 1930s horror movies, and he was bald in that movie. For example, I mean, you just saw his round face, his round head, and it was also amazing. So yes, it was a historic moment to hire him in an English-speaking part, also because he's speaking in such a unique way. Of course, the story goes that he didn't know a single sentence in English, that his French was a bit better, and there is this great anecdote, I think, that when he met Hitchcock, he was just listening to Hitchcock, and he knew that Hitchcock likes to have some attentive listeners. So just when he thought that Hitch had a punchline, he was starting to laugh, in a very, very crazy way. So, and that's why, he tried to make himself more kind of sympathetic to the director. So yes, and his presence in this movie is really, really unique. Also because Peter Lorre as a person and as an actor carries with him, I would say, some gravitas that it's not really part of the movie. I mean, we mentioned, I think it's great he's there, he's like perfect there, but also I see him as some kind of a counterpoint. We have this very superficial story with conspiracy, some occult group in a church with all of this that we discussed, that begins in Switzerland with we see the first image we see is of postcards of Switzerland and the hand that is changing the travel catalogs. It's so it's so funny and so actually lightweight in a way. And then we have Peter Lorre, who, of course, besides his lung connections, in general was a tormented soul also in his real life. I hope we'll have some time to discuss it, maybe when we'll be discussing his second performance in a Hitchcock film, to say a bit more about his life. But he's a fascinating performer, and I think he carries, as I mentioned, this kind of heaviness, some seriousness underneath it all. I mean, you can see some serious struggles inside him. So he's a bit like, I would say Marlon Brando or some other tormented actors that their very presence makes the whole thing, very serious in a way.
I agree that just to have him there is enough to make this movie complicated. Just to a single shot of Peter Lorre makes your film have depth, basically. Well, any final thoughts? I have to say that I do love this film. I think it's very good. I enjoyed revisiting it. I grew up watching the new version. Mm-hmm. It's funny that we refer to as new because it's many years old, but I saw this, much later, but I think it's brisk. I think it's strange, and it makes a great pathway to what I personally consider the first Hitchcock masterpiece, which we'll discuss next time. 39 Steps. I think this is my, perfect film, and also Lady Vanishes, but this is several films apart. So yes, my feelings are very positive. By the way, apparently there's no Hitchcock cameo in this film. Philip French says that there's this guy who walks by. Philip French doesn't believe that it's Hitchcock. I also don't think it's Hitchcock, actually. We don't know.
We don't
right?
know.
Yeah.
I would say he looks like Hitchcock,
Okay.
so I don't know.
Yeah, it's a strange film because we don't know if there's a Hitchcock cameo. If you have any ideas, you can let us know. So any final thoughts on The Man Who Knew Too Much?
Yeah, just two small footnotes. One we partially covered, which is the reception of this movie. Not only contemporary reviewers, some of them, like Otis Ferguson, were against. Most of them were enthusiastic, right? I mean, this movie was very well received. But also, when you try to speak about Hitchcock only through the lens of Cahiers du Cinéma and French critics turned filmmakers like Romer, Chabrol, and Truffaut, you get this distorted vision of Hitchcock, I would say. I think we can say it openly now. We alluded to that earlier. So, for example...
We are offering you the real Hitchcock, by the way.
Of course, that's what we're doing, exactly. So, for example, when your number one book about Hitchcock, as it used to be for me, is Hitchcock Truffaut, you get this vision, because that's part of the conversation, and Truffaut is really pressing hard, to make Hitchcock admit that the American version is really the version, the real one, and this one is like a sketch, like a preparation. So and Romer and Chabrol also say something like that. So you can sense like two things. One is that this these critics' fascination with 1950s American cinema, but also their fascination with auteurs as people who always make the same movie. And if you are a strong believer in politique des auteurs or film auteur theory, you know that the later movie must be better, because these auteurs are so brilliant that Hitchcock's new version of his own movie must be much better, which of course is not always the case, or maybe it's rarely the case. I'm reminded of Michael Haneke's Funny Games, which the US version is really not very good, right? And it's almost like a shot-by-shot self-remake. So that's one thing, don't trust the French. We should read them, but maybe we should not trust them when it comes to the judgment of Hitchcock works. And the second thing that I think will reappear in Rebecca, for example, is this Hitchcock's great ability to produce this very simple yet very sinister images. Of course, when we have Peter Lorre, it's clear that he's a great personality. But for example, there are some shots of the nurse Agnès, that's how she's called, played by Cicely Oates. She's a companion of Lorre in this movie, this older lady. She gets shot at the end, and we get some very sinister shots of her in the church. And that's just one of the images I was thinking when I was coming to record this conversation, the image of her as this very sinister figure, which kind of transports us to Mrs. Danvers. So I would say that's also something that I enjoyed in this movie.
And on a sad note, and also Dan Callahan actually mentions this in the book, Cicely Oates died the same year this film came out. So this was her, final performance. I would say that yes, we should definitely be very careful with the French when they are talking about Hitchcock. However, we also owe them the fact that we are sitting here today, because yes, they were the first ones who, even started to consider Hitchcock as a major artist. So on this complicated note, we finish the discussion of The Man Who Knew Too Much, and we are already preparing for the episode on 39 Steps. And as always, we encourage you to like us on Facebook. We have our fan page, Foreign Correspondents Deeper into Hitchcock. If you have any questions about the podcast, you can email us at hitchcock.podcast@gmail.com. And it's a great pleasure to record those conversations. We enjoy revisiting those films. So if you happen to also be a Hitchcock fan, please share the news about this podcast. We are very, very happy to find new listeners and new fellow Hitchcock fans. So, this was yet another episode of Foreign Correspondence.
Deeper into Hitchcock.